Wyoming Territory. Spring of 1881. The wind howled low across the foothills of the Bighorns as Clara O'Dale stepped off the westbound stagecoach, her boots hitting dry earth like the start of something she could not name yet. The town behind her was small, just a few dust-blown buildings and a rail spur that looked like it had not seen a proper load in weeks. But ahead beyond the ridge and past the cottonwoods lay the ranch where her brother had sent her. A place called Hollow Creek, owned by a man he trusted. A quiet rancher named Isaiah Holt. Clara adjusted her satchel and tried not to wince. Her body still ached from the long ride, but it was the weight inside her chest that stayed heavier. 3 years of marriage back in Virginia. 3 years of trying. 2 miscarriages. One final visit to the doctor who had spoken plainly and without softness. "It is unlikely you'll ever carry a child to term. I am sorry." Her husband had not said much when she told him, just packed up and left 2 weeks later. No goodbye, no note, just gone. Now, 30 years old and hollowed out in more ways than one, Clara had come here with no plans, no hope, and no idea what to do next. The ranch was farther than she expected. Her brother's letter had said Isaiah would meet her, but the road was empty, so she walked. By the time she reached the edge of the Holt property, the sun had dipped low, and the sky glowed orange behind a line of grazing horses. She paused at the fence, breath catching not from the long walk, but at the sight of a man on horseback, silhouetted against the fire-colored light. He was tall, lean, and still. Watching her, he nudged his horse forward slowly. "You are Clara." His voice was calm, a low drawl without judgment or surprise. She nodded, trying to stand straighter. "Yes, I was told you expected me." He dismounted with a quiet grace, boots crunching the gravel. "Your brother wrote, said you needed work, said you were strong." He looked at her a second longer than necessary. "You look tired." Clara's throat tightened. She was not used to kindness, not anymore. "I am," she said simply. Isaiah gave a single nod. "Come on, then." Supper's warm. Inside the main house, everything smelled of wood smoke and beef stew. Clara sat at a pine table while Isaiah moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency. He did not ask questions. He did not pry. He simply filled her plate and poured her water like she belonged there. "I do not have much help right now," he said after a while. "You will sleep in the east room. You can help with the horses, the laundry, and keeping the cellar stocked." "That sounds fair." She stared down at her plate, then forced herself to meet his eyes. "Thank you." He nodded once, then turned back to the stove. The days passed steady after that. Clara rose early and worked hard. She mucked stalls, mended torn reins, scrubbed laundry on a washboard until her fingers were raw. At night she helped cook, then sat beside the fire with Isaiah, saying little, sharing the kind of silence that did not feel lonely. He was not like other men. He never bragged or barked orders. He listened. He fixed things with his hands. He remembered what she liked in her tea. 2 weeks in, she found him repairing a broken fence near the west pasture. She brought him water and he thanked her quietly before wiping sweat off his brow. "You always live alone?" she asked, not looking directly at him. "For some time," he said. "Had a family once." "Wife passed 6 winters ago. No children," Clara nodded, heart tugging. "I was married too. He left when I could not, when the doctor said I would not have children." Isaiah's hammer paused mid-swing. He looked at her, eyes steady. "That does not make you less." She did not reply. Just stood there holding the empty tin cup, her fingers gripping it too tight. That night after supper, she found him out by the corral, leaning on the fence watching the stars come out. She stepped beside him. "I still feel it sometimes," she said quietly. "Like something's wrong with me. Like I failed at something I was supposed to be." Isaiah looked over at her with a softness she had not seen before. "You did not fail. Some paths just look different. Clara tried to speak, but her throat felt full. Instead, she just stood there, shoulder brushing his. Weeks turned into a month. Spring ripened. The fields bloomed. Clara began to smile more. She laughed once when Isaiah's stubborn mare kicked over a bucket and he muttered under his breath. He looked up at her then, surprised by the sound, and smiled back like he had not done it in a long while. Then one morning, everything changed. She was in the barn when she heard the crying. A child's cry. Sharp, high, scared. She ran out and found Isaiah carrying two small children in his arms, one no older than 4, the other barely walking. Both filthy, both shaking. "Found them by the creek," he said, voice tight. "Wagon tracks nearby, no sign of anyone else." Clara dropped to her knees. "Give them here." The older one clung to her, sobbing into her neck. The baby whimpered softly in Isaiah's arms. That night, after washing them and wrapping them in spare quilts, Clara sat beside the fire with Isaiah and stared at the sleeping children. "You think someone left them on purpose?" she asked. Isaiah's jaw tightened. "Looks that way. They kept the children, of course." There was no lawman nearby, and no one came asking. Clara named the boy Jasper and the baby girl June. They both clung to her like she was all they had. Isaiah built a cradle. Clara sewed little shirts out of old muslin. The house filled with noise and warmth and motion, and something else too. One night, after she had rocked June to sleep and tucked Jasper in beside her, Clara found Isaiah on the porch, watching the moon climb high. She stood beside him, then reached for his hand. "I never thought I would have this," she whispered. "Not children. Not love." His fingers tightened around hers. "You do now," Isaiah said softly. She turned toward him, and he kissed her slow and sure, like he had been waiting for the right moment. And just like that, her future looked nothing like the one she had imagined. It looked better. By midsummer, the land around Hollow Creek had softened with green. The cottonwoods rustled high, and the hay fields leaned heavy under the sun. Clara stood at the edge of the garden rows, gathering sage and sweet mint, June strapped to her hip, and Jasper trailing behind with a tin pail full of potatoes he'd helped pull from the earth. "You missed that one," she said gently, nudging a clod of dirt aside with her toe. Jasper crouched down, his small fingers brushing the soil until they closed around the last tuber. "Got it." She smiled and touched the back of his head before turning toward the house. Isaiah had been working on the wind pump all morning. The old one had rusted clean through, and the new blades had come up on the wagon from Buffalo 2 days earlier. He'd spent hours fitting them, silent and steady, only pausing to check the angle of the sun. Jasper ran ahead, shouting for Isaiah. June shifted against Clara's shoulder, her breath warm against Clara's neck. She found Isaiah tightening the last bolt, brow furrowed. Jasper climbed onto the fence rail beside him, chattering about snakes and bluebirds. Isaiah handed him a wrench without a word and steadied the rail while the boy pretended to help. Clara waited until Jasper had wandered off again before stepping closer. "You've been out here since dawn." Isaiah looked up, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. "Had to be done. You never ask for help, not really." His eyes held hers for a moment before he wiped his hands on a rag. "Some things are mine to carry." She brushed a fleck of dirt from June's cheek. "And some things don't have to be." Isaiah set the rag aside. "You think I don't see how much you do? I don't do it to be seen." "I know that." They stood quiet for a moment, the only sound the creak of the pump catching its first turn of wind. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "I do." And Isaiah reached out and touched the curve of June's back, his hand resting there like a promise. "I think I want you here, not just for now." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I've never needed much," he said, "but I'd like a life with you." If you want that too. Clara felt something warm settle in her chest, slow and sure. I never thought I'd be part of anything again, not like this. Isaiah didn't press. He never did. He just waited. I want that life, she said. The next day, Clara began sewing curtains for the second bedroom, Jasper's room now. Isaiah cleared space in the barn loft, turning it into a place where the boy could learn to work with his hands. June took her first steps across the kitchen floor, reaching from Clara to Isaiah and back again, giggling with each wobbly stride. They received word come August that no one had claimed the children. The circuit judge in Buffalo sent a rider with papers, and Isaiah signed them without hesitation. Clara's hand trembled as she added her name beside his, but when it was done, she felt steadier than she had in years. One dusk, they sat beneath the porch awning, watching a summer storm roll over the hills. Jasper slept curled in a blanket on the floor behind them. June lay in Isaiah's lap, thumb in her mouth, eyes fluttering shut. Clara traced the edge of Isaiah's sleeve with her fingers. Did you ever think life would turn out like this? He looked out toward the darkening sky. No. But I'm grateful it did. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the scent of rain settling around them. I used to think I wasn't enough, she said. That if I couldn't give a man a child, I couldn't give him anything. Isaiah turned toward her, voice low. You gave me a home. You gave them a family. You gave me back something I didn't know I was missing. The thunder rumbled in the distance, soft and low. I love you, she said, the words quiet but certain. Isaiah kissed her temple. I've loved you longer than I've known how to say it. June stirred, sighing in her sleep. Clara reached up and laced her fingers with his. In that moment, nothing felt broken. Nothing felt missing. Their life wasn't the one she had imagined years ago, but it was the one she chose, rooted in quiet strength, stitched together with kindness, and growing each day under the Wyoming sky. By late September, a thin gold light settled over Hollow Creek, and the hills began their slow turn toward frost. Clara stood at the sewing table beside the window, piecing together a winter coat for Jasper from a worn wool blanket Isaiah had found in the cellar. Her stitches were neater these days, steadier. June slept in the cradle nearby, cheeks pink from the afternoon air. Isaiah came in just before sundown, brushing dust from his sleeves, his jaw shadowed with end-of-day stubble. He hung his hat without a word and crossed to the washbasin to clean his hands. Clara watched him from across the room, noting the new creases at the corners of his eyes, the tiredness that had settled into the slope of his shoulders over the past week. You've been favoring your left side, she said, folding the coat in progress over the chair. Since the fencing out past the ridge, he dried his hands slowly. Wasn't much, just twisted something. You haven't slept through the night since. She stepped toward him, careful not to wake June. Let me look at it. Isaiah hesitated, then unbuttoned his shirt and turned slightly to show the bruising just beneath his ribs. The skin was mottled deep purple, edged in green. Clara pressed her fingers gently along the swelling. You tore something, Isaiah. That's not a twist. It'll heal. Not if you keep hauling feed sacks like nothing's wrong. He looked at her then, not irritated but with a quiet unsettledness. I'm not used to someone minding after me, he said. You'll have to get used to it. She wrapped the bandage snug around his ribs, tying it off with practiced fingers. He didn't flinch, just watched her with that still, searching gaze he used when words weren't enough. Later that evening, after Jasper had finished drawing letters in the dust with a stick, and June was fussing softly in her sleep, Isaiah sat at the kitchen table while Clara poured warm cider into tin mugs. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and dry hay. The lantern cast slow-moving shadows on the wall. I had a letter today, he said, reaching into his coat and pulling it free. From my cousin down in Colorado Territory. He's handing off his parcel near Trinidad. Says it's good grazing land, but too much for him now. Clara wrapped her hands around her mug, puzzled. You thinking of going down there? No. I told him I'm rooted here, but he asked if I knew anyone young and steady who might want the land. Said he'd rather it go to someone he trusts than sell it off to a stranger. She watched him closely. Are you asking me? Isaiah held her gaze. I'm asking if you'd want to build something from bare dirt, not now, not tomorrow, but in time. Together. Clara looked down at the mug between her hands. The thought of starting over, not from loss but from choice, stirred something deep. I thought this was our place, she said. This house, this land. It is, he said softly, but someday Jasper and June will need room to stretch. And I want you to have something that's ours from the first nail. She sat still for a long moment, weighing the idea not with fear, but quiet consideration. Then she nodded. I'd build anything with you. A week later they rode out to the south pasture, Jasper bundled between them on the saddle, June tucked into a sling across Clara's chest. The grass was turning brittle, whispering of snow to come. They stopped where the trees opened wide and the land sloped gentle and clear. Clara looked around at the empty stretch. If we had a house here, she said, we could put the garden behind those cottonwoods, keep it sheltered from the wind. Isaiah nodded. Barn just east of it. Near the stream. And the children's rooms facing morning sun. He smiled then, slow and quiet. You've been building it in your head already, for a while now. By the time frost set in, they'd drawn up plans on scrap paper and started drying timber in the barn. Jasper helped where he could, fetching nails, holding boards. Clara kept the books and measured fabric for curtains that didn't yet have windows. One evening, as the sky turned pale with an early snow, Isaiah came in from the barn and found Clara by the hearth, June nestled in her arms, Jasper asleep at her feet. He knelt beside her, resting his hands on her knees. I never asked, he said, but I'd like to. Properly? She looked down at him, heart stilling. I want you to marry me, Isaiah said. Not for the papers, not for the children, but because I love you, and I want you to carry my name the way I carry your steadiness. Clara didn't answer right away. She reached up, brushed a flake of sawdust from his hair. Yes, she said, because I love you, because I'm not hollow anymore. He kissed her then, slow and certain, while the fire crackled low and snow drifted quiet against the windows. Their beginning had been born of broken things. But what they were building now grew from choice, from the soil of shared days, from a kind of love that did not need proving. And outside, beneath the snow, the earth waited for spring. The snow held through December, thick along the eaves and packed down over the trails that ran between the house and the barn. Clara moved through the days with sleeves rolled high, her cheeks chapped from cold, hair pinned back in a way that never quite held. She'd taken to baking late in the afternoons, kneading dough with June strapped snug across her chest, while Jasper sat at the table carving a block of cedar into what he swore would be a horse. The house smelled of yeast and pine resin, and beneath it all, the quiet rhythm of a life settling into itself. Isaiah spent longer hours inside now, resting his ribs as she'd asked him to, though he still found small tasks to keep his hands from going idle. He'd begun restoring an old rocking chair they'd found in the shed, sanding it by lamplight after supper, the scrape of the grain against his file steady and patient. One night, after the children were tucked in and the kettle had cooled, Clara leaned against the doorframe of the sitting room and watched him work. He didn't look up right away, just moved the cloth in long, practiced strokes over the curve of the armrest. You ever think about what you missed? She asked. He set the cloth down. Sometimes, but it doesn't feel like missing any more. She stepped closer. I used to think I'd always be just the person left behind, the one waiting for something that never came. Isaiah shifted in the chair, resting his hand on the edge of the wood. So what changed? Clara knelt beside him, folding her hands over his knee. You didn't come to fill something. You just came and stayed. He didn't answer, just leaned forward and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, the gesture quiet and certain. The next morning, Clara found a scrap of newsprint tucked into the folds of her sewing basket. It was a notice from the Buffalo Gazette, printed months ago and yellowed at the edges. There'd been a foundling home established on the far edge of town, new since the summer. She stared at the clipping, then brought it to Isaiah as he was fitting new hinges onto the pantry door. I don't know why I've held onto this, she said, handing it over. He read it in silence. You're thinking of going, not to leave anything behind, but maybe there's another child there with no one, and maybe we've got room. He folded the paper once, then again. If you want to go, I'll take you. They made the trip in late January, bundled in layers and with the wagon reinforced for the road. Clara held June close while Jasper sat beside Isaiah, pointing out elk tracks and shouting when they crossed the frozen creek. The foundling home was a long, low building on the edge of the cottonwood grove, smoke curling from a chimney that leaned slightly east. Inside, the matron was kind-eyed and practical, her hair streaked with gray and her boots caked with ash. We've got 6, she said, leading them through the narrow hallway. All from different places. Most won't stay long. Folks come through, take what they think they can manage. Clara stopped beside a cot where a girl no older than 7 sat braiding her own hair, her face tight with caution. The child didn't speak, just watched them with an evenness that reminded Clara of her own reflection some mornings. What's her name? She asked. Naomi, the matron replied. She doesn't say much, been here longest. Isaiah crouched down beside the cot. You hungry? He asked. Naomi nodded once. Do you like horses? A pause, then another nod. He stood and looked at Clara. Let's bring her home, Clara said. The return trip was quiet. Naomi sat between them, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes never leaving the treetops. When they reached Hollow Creek, Jasper ran ahead to show her the barn, tugging her by the sleeve until she followed. That evening, after supper, Clara brought out the mended coat she'd made for Jasper last autumn and helped Naomi into it. The sleeves were long, but Naomi didn't complain. She just stood near the hearth, watching the fire like it might tell her something. Isaiah came in from checking the barn doors. He nodded at Naomi, then reached for Clara's hand. I don't know if we're doing this right, Clara whispered. He squeezed gently. We're doing it with care. That's enough. Later, long after the lamps were out and the house had gone still, Clara lay awake beside Isaiah, listening to the wind rake its slow fingers across the window panes. She didn't speak once, she said softly. She will, he murmured. When she's ready. In the days that followed, Naomi kept to herself. She watched everything: how Clara stirred the soup, how Isaiah measured fence posts, how Jasper climbed the apple tree and fell twice without crying. But she said nothing. Then one morning, as Clara hung linens out by the shed, she felt a tug on her skirt. Naomi stood there, holding June in both arms with surprising steadiness. She was fussing, the girl said. I didn't want her crying alone. Clara crouched down slowly. You did just right. Naomi looked down at June, then back at Clara. Can I help with the bread today? Clara nodded, throat tight. Yes, of course. By early spring, the girl spoke more often. She followed Isaiah out to the barn each morning and came back with her braid undone and her hands dirt-streaked. Jasper showed her where the wild mint grew and how to spot owl feathers in the grass. One night, as they all sat by the fire, Naomi leaned her head against Clara's arm and whispered, You feel like someone I've known before." Clara wrapped an arm around her and held her close. The family they were shaping didn't come from blood or name. It came from hands extended, from trust earned in quiet moments and backed by action. There was nothing missing anymore, nothing broken. And as the crocuses pushed up through thawed earth, Hollow Creek held them all no longer a place of refuge, but a place of belonging. A life deeply chosen. A future wrapped not in what had been lost, but in what had been built. By early May, the last of the snowmelt had softened the pastures into a patchwork of green and clay. The creek ran fast now, and the cottonwoods near the southern edge of the property rustled with new leaves, their tips silver when the wind turned them. Clara stood barefoot beside the water, her hem damp and pinned up, watching Jasper and Naomi work together to pull a crooked branch from the bank. June sat in the shade behind them, stuffing dandelions into the pocket of her apron. Isaiah had gone into town at mid-morning, riding out with the sun barely above the ridge. He'd taken Jasper's whittled horse in his coat, wrapped in a strip of blue cloth, and kissed Clara's cheek with a promise to return before dusk. He hadn't said what his errand was. She hadn't asked. These days, she trusted the shape of things without needing to name their every part. As the children played, Clara bent to rinse potatoes in the shallows, the water numbing her skin. Naomi ran over, breathless and pink-cheeked. "He said we could build a raft," she said, crouching beside her. "Just a small one, said he'll help lash it." Clara handed her a half-cleaned spud. "If he said so, I trust him, but no sailing without someone watching." Naomi nodded solemnly, then stood and ran back to help Jasper. Clara watched her go, her braids swinging with each step. The girl's voice had grown louder these past weeks, her questions more curious, her silences more thoughtful than guarded. There was weight in her gaze still, but it no longer pressed so heavily against the walls of the house. That evening, Isaiah returned later than expected, the wagon rattling up the road as the sun dipped low. Clara met him near the porch, brushing flour from her hands. "Everything all right?" she asked. He climbed down slowly, then reached into the back of the wagon and lifted out a narrow wooden chest, the kind with dovetail joints and brass corners dulled by time. "I stopped by the county clerks," he said, setting it down with care. "Told them I want to leave the land in all 4 names. Yours, mine, and the children's." Clara knelt beside the chest, her fingers tracing the grain. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. We built this together. I want them to know it's theirs, even after we're gone." She stood again, brushing her skirt smooth. "You think that far ahead?" He looked past her toward the fields. "I do now." Later, after supper and chores were done, they sat on the porch with the children asleep inside. The breeze carried a faint scent of pine pitch and turned earth. Clara leaned against Isaiah's side, her head resting just below his shoulder. "I saw something today," she said. "Out by the far fence, a pair of cranes nesting near the marshy bend." He reached for her hand. "That's good land out there. Maybe we put the orchard there next spring." "I'd like that." They sat in silence, watching the sky turn lavender behind the hills. Then Isaiah shifted slightly, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a ring, simple silver, the band etched with a small sunburst at its center. "I had this made in Buffalo," he said, "from one of my mother's brooches. I didn't want something new, I wanted something that carried time." Clara's eyes welled, but she didn't look away. "You already gave me a life. I don't need anything more, I know, but I want to mark the choosing. Not just once, but each day." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit without struggle. She turned her hand in the fading light. "It's perfect." He leaned in and kissed her, slow and sure, the way he always did when words felt smaller than what needed saying. That summer, they built the orchard fence. The children helped plant saplings apple, pear, and plum, each one marked with a wooden stake and a scrap of cloth to keep the deer off. Naomi carved letters into the stakes with Isaiah's pocket knife, careful and steady, and Jasper followed behind, watering the roots with a tin pail. Clara kept the ledger now, balancing the harvest yields against the supply orders they sent into town. She stitched Isaiah a linen shirt for the hotter months and made dresses for Naomi that matched June's, each one with a deep pocket where they tucked small treasures, feathers, bits of quartz, the occasional caterpillar. The raft never made it far, but the children rebuilt it twice, each time stronger than the last. On warm nights, they ate supper beneath the cottonwoods, fireflies flitting above the grass as Isaiah strummed the dulcimer he'd kept stored in the attic. Clara sang sometimes, quiet and low, her voice steadier now, her hands always in motion, passing bread, brushing June's hair, tucking a blanket around Naomi's shoulders. The world had not grown simpler. There were still fences to mend, storms to weather, mouths to feed. But the house stood solid, the barn roof tight and the hearts within it full. Years passed. The orchard bore fruit. Jasper grew tall, Naomi surer. June learned to read by the firelight, her voice halting, then confident. And always, Clara and Isaiah moved through it side by side, not as people who had lost and found each other, but as those who had chosen, day after day, to build something lasting. They were older now. Their hands bore the marks of work and the softness of love well tended. They sat often at dusk, watching the land they'd shaped hold steady beneath the wide Wyoming sky. And when Isaiah reached for her hand, as he always did, Clara laced her fingers through his with the quiet certainty of a woman who had found every piece of herself, right where she'd planted it.